see, in 831, this is the completely online one. Assignments. Research essays. So they have to do all these quizzes and stuff you guys don't have to do. Okay, so now, gosh, let's see. I'm just trying to figure out how to do this without showing you a whole bunch of grades of people that you don't know. Submissions. Oh, I could download it and then just open up. Okay, let me do that. Oh, did it already go? What's your name? Let's just see Let's just see if this was it. Hi, Chris.
Changed my mind.
Oh, you were going to stream?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for coming in. It creates a little more,
Nobody else, huh?
more life. And I bet Chris is always here. Yeah, so this one was good. I don't, we're just looking over a couple of, Kyra was saying, you know, what's up with, okay, you guys don't need that many references. What was really strong about this one is not only, so actually let's pull up the prompts just to.
That was one of the examples.
Yeah, this is because the online class already turned in their essays, so I've been grading them. And so where is the, okay. It says, discuss the pros, cons, and implications of the proliferation of social networking tools. Okay, great. So I tell you a few things, and then we can look at that specific essay. So first off is, given that the student demo doesn't tend to consume old school news, there's some kind of confusion as to what news actually is. Hey, Jody.
Hi.
You just turn it on.
Okay, great.
Okay. So one of the poor essays, for instance, spent a lot of time talking about, BART stoppages, traffic updates, and stuff like that. Just, sort of singing the praises for a page and a half of, basically fast information over the internet. But when we talk about news, I mean, we're talking about, reporter-based news, which requires, a person to track down facts and, do some, it's one of the examples in that essay was, police work, and, just basically saying you're practically a detective if you're, a reporter on a big city newspaper like the Chronicle or the LA Times or something, which is a big difference than, citizen journalism, great. But, standing 2 blocks away from a shooting or something and holding your phone and showing an image is not the same as the reporter on the big paper who spends, the next 3 weeks researching who did it, what was it all about. So first of all, a sense of what we're actually talking about when we talk about news is pretty important, and there are very few individuals without the backing of a news organization that can do the kind of work that leads to what we really call news. If we get into broadcast news, it's a little bit, thinner, and people typically laugh at, KRON or KTVU or something as an investigative reporting source. But they still, have the manpower and the institutional, depth in order to actually, research stories and report them, So I think that's an important thing. So what people are often complaining about in news that's gathered through social media is either the audience misconstruing what news is, and it's just somebody blah, blah, blahing with no clear, support with facts or stuff like that. Or it's like purposefully misleading news. So people who sit and, concoct entire stories about Hillary Clinton with a Pizzagate and all the rest of it, it says, and it sounds like real news. It sounds like it's being reported, but it's not, So then it's intentionally fake and misleading news. So I'd say those are probably the two types of things that people complain about most, And some of that is in the hands of the audience. You're just, not educated as to what news is, and the other half is, like purposely propaganda, basically misleading and such. And if you just pick up the Epoch Times that is left around campus all the time, it is Chinese propaganda basically, and it was super interesting, some of that stuff. So anyhow, so first thing with this one is probably when discussing the cons, is to be sure that you're complaining about things that truly are news as delivered. And so that's think about the Chronicle and reporters or the LA Times and the kind of stories they bring versus traffic updates or stuff like that. Okay. And then, hey Rick, pros. I mean, feel free to think about what's beneficial about this, as well, and certainly, a lot of good aspects come to mind too, and definitely having a little bit of both is great. And organizing the essay around pros, cons, and implications is a great thing to do. Makes it a lot easier for me to grade if I kind of have all the good stuff clustered in a couple of paragraphs, and then the cons, all the bad stuff clustered in 2 or more paragraphs or something like that. And then getting into the implications, by that I mean kind of just looking forward, given that I don't think the audience is going to change until there's a new kind of revolutionary media distribution system like social media is now. I think social media is it. And so, we're looking forward, what are we going to do with everybody getting their news through social media? And this would lead to, if you want to talk about what's being done already, Facebook and if any other social media are doing their best to kind of, flag fake news as fake news, really fake news we're talking about. I guess I shouldn't even use the word because Trump has debased it so effectively. So, flagging misleading news stories on their services, or, God forbid, they could actually pay a little bit of the expense necessary to produce real news, like factual news, basically. Because if that's I think another implication of all this is that the social media platforms have undercut the way that old news was created, and they haven't really paid their way as to creating new news. In the sense that you don't make enough money off of advertising through Facebook or through other platforms, nowhere near what you used to. So you can't really support the necessary journalistic depth in your organization to do it. So maybe there are schemes out there, or maybe you could simply propose the utility of actually paying a little bit more for news so that the news producers could do a better job. So to me, that falls under kind of implications. It's like the audience is not going to change what they want to do. So how can what can we do about this now? And I think some people writing just think that news doesn't matter at all. So that's another thing I do. Having read, this was a very popular prompt because Rick, I was reading the online submissions for the online section. They already turned their essays in last week, and so I've been looking them over and grading them. So Kyra was asking about this one, the social media one, which is very popular. And then you guys have the streaming video one, which is exclusively yours. I didn't give it to them, so that could be another one. So then it says, your discussion must include recent events that have been impacted by social networking as a news source. And I'd say what really made this example a standout is that the examples are not just examples, but they're used to kind of advance the, the general discussion about social media, basically. So I'd say that's what made this a total standout, was that it wasn't just, Philando Castile's girlfriend, filmed him after the cops had basically executed him in his car and stuff, and so the Facebook Live, it wasn't just like, okay, there's that, but using the incidents to kind of unpack whole ideas about social media. So for instance, she was writing in the week with the Paris cathedral burning, and she's writing here about how YouTube's algorithm mistakenly flagged it as 9/11 footage because it was taught to search for smoke and flames and disaster and stuff, and how difficult it was for YouTube, even being told about it, to kind of unplug that whole system, which was mislabeling the footage, and then perhaps creating in people's minds a kind of, this was apparently an accidental fire, but if you connect it to 9/11 and people are not paying much attention, then it starts to sound like, terrorists in Paris burning down the Notre Dame Cathedral or something. So it was an example which then brought up the whole issue of how tough it is for these platforms, which have literally billions of readers and very little control about what's posted, how tough it is for them to control, that kind of scale. So anyway, this was well done. So there's some ideas anyway about that one. How are you? I won't ask how it's going on this essay, but find the time to fit it in with the other 5 essays that you probably have to write in the next couple of weeks. And I guess good advice for all of them is try to, if the prompt suggests a structure, like discuss the pros, cons, and implications, that helps a lot in getting it written and knowing that you've said enough stuff and that you're on the right topic and stuff. And it helps you go a little deeper.
Would you consider this research paper like a little bit more complex than the first one?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I showed you an example which took it that way, but no, I'd say it's pretty much the same thing. You can use the textbook as your main source of information. And for instance, again, in this one, your own awareness of the current events of the day that involve, social media, whether it's the New Zealand shooter or, the latest thing is Sri Lanka, the bombings in the churches, and there's the whole question of how did this, tiny little village, manage to get access to sophisticated explosives and stuff like that.
I'm writing down a note because I'm not like texting in the middle.
Oh, that's cool. No, that's fine. So you're thinking of some evidence or some current events.
Yeah,
so.
just based off of what you just said.
And by, within 2 weeks, there'll be more. I mean, it just endlessly rolls out. What I would say about that is, take 10, 15 minutes to kind of research exactly what the outcome was. Like I had Philando Castile on my mind. It's a terrible event, but so the student raised it as, kind of evidence of how, like a Facebook video can make a difference, And then I thought, did that really make a difference? And I looked it up, and so the guy who shot him, the officer, was acquitted and fired. But that's all he got for killing a guy. Was basically he got fired from his job as a police officer, and then that's it. So did the video really make a difference? I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
Didn't stop it from happening.
Didn't stop
It's
it.
happening.
Yeah.
But it did help advance like body cam requirements, even
Yes.
though they're finding ways to break that.
And he had a body cam on him, so that
Yeah.
was eventually evidence that was, because that had the incident from start to finish. But
Yeah.
I still don't think he came off well at all.
No.
So,
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of like arguments about, well, how effective is the body cam footage, and also like oftentimes officers will mysteriously turn off their cam for certain portions of the time. It's just a
yeah.
argument.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think any kind of image technology now is going to be our magic bullet for, seeing what's true and what really happens. It's, you know, there's too much context. As you say, you can unplug it. The angle's wrong, or you know, something happened just before the clip. Or
New York Times, like a couple of years ago, did a really like fascinating thing where they had the same incident. They staged an incident with body cam footage, and so they had like an officer and they had a perpetrator, and they had asked readers to like watch the 3 different angles and to describe what's happening, and it's like really just like hard to see what's going on, and
Cool.
so like you could vote on what was happening,
Okay.
and almost everybody got it wrong. Like everyone had their own interpretation. It's like, well, here's what really happened. There was no like altercation, and
Wow.
it was pretty crazy.
That is a great kind of teaching exercise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, I wish we could do something like that in our context here. You know, that's really cool. Wow. I'll look that up.
Yeah.
Being a Times subscriber. Hey, Julian. I mean, that's the other thing I keep thinking is whenever we ask this question about, you know, the difficulty of news through social media and how they're not getting paid and stuff, you know, I mean, it's like a student subscription to one of these newspapers, maybe $4 or $5 a month. I know that's significant, but. So I think it was Julian asked, you know, what about these discussions? And so we only missed one that I allowed to let go, which is,
We have to do these on.
well, that's the thing. But we have, I looked over the grades, and I think there's submissions from everybody except for this one. So what I would say is, if you think you missed one, go in and look, and you know, just go ahead and do it. This one is for this week, and then this one, if people have been doing them exclusively in class, this is the only one that I didn't hand out. So if you have been like just keeping track of this part of the class just by doing them and giving them to me, then there's still this one. Would you guys like to have this one as well? This one's really like not hard to do. The week 13, working in media, that was the week that we looked at local news production in stations. Because that's, you know, for broadcasting where a lot of the jobs are. So please don't try to fill both of these out today. I'd much rather have your attention on media violence if we could. Because this is a very important week, both for just, you know, your knowledge and also for the exam and stuff, because there's a lot of exam questions on the topic of this week. So I do want to get back to like doing a conscientious job on this. So we're in week 16. Wow, we're almost there, guys. So this week's chapter is all about basically social scientific research on the media. What that means is people have studied media effects for a long time. And it's very hard to prove a lot of effects that we think are pretty commonplace. For instance, that watching a lot of violent video games promotes violent acts in society. And they really have not had a great success in demonstrating that. So this is, some of the value in this is not to tell you new things that we can confirm for you and now you absolutely know it about the media, but rather to say, this is stuff that everybody thinks is true, and to the best of our ability, we have not been able to prove it. So it may not actually be true that watching a lot of violent video games promotes, you know, violent acts in society. On the same case, there is some excellent research in media violence, which has some a different way of thinking about it, very powerful way of thinking about it. So by the end of class, we should get there. I sure hope. This is a little historical view of what has interested social scientists about media from you know, the early days on. And early thinking about media, we're talking about media effects, the idea that we could look at a particular media and see some kind of direct causal effect on population, on the audience. Okay, so the idea is, you know, a simple example would be you watch an advertisement and then you go out and you buy what's in the advertisement. And we know that that works sometimes, but that it doesn't work all the time, and that's where it gets complicated, right? If it was simple, if you just watched the advertisement, went out and bought the product, then we could talk about a strong effect. Just expose, in advertising they call it an impression, right? So just give an impression and then you get the desired behavior. And wouldn't advertisers be happy about that? Wouldn't propagandists be happy about that, if you could show those types of things? Unfortunately, as we said, we know from our own experience, we don't necessarily go out and buy the product when we see the ad. So strong effects were sort of a hoped for result. The researchers were hoping they could demonstrate that type of relationship, but they couldn't. And now they're rather disparagingly called the magic bullet theory of the 1920s, the idea that the media message would impact into your brain like a bullet, and you would have that direct causal effect. See the ad, buy the product. They did not distinguish between different audiences and their tendency to be affected or not. All people affected equally. Versus nowadays, we know that kids are more susceptible to some kinds of imagery than adults are, for instance. So there's a big exception made for kids programming. And the idea that, in this theoretical world, the media is all powerful. We're brainwashed. That's, So we would want to avoid using language like that when discussing media because it, gives an idea that is much too simple about the whole, oh yeah, everybody's brainwashed, you watch this and you do that, the government, blah, and you'll hear that kind of thing. Right? So in the early days, they thought this was really important because coming out of the First World War, they had noticed the effectiveness of propaganda in terms of, back in those days, people would fly over in a plane and drop leaflets on the troops and stuff. They would say like, give up now because you're going to lose and your girlfriend's back home or sleeping with the guys who are too chicken to come and fight and stuff. All kinds of, really discouraging material sent out to the opponents, And then also another aspect of propaganda, which is maybe relevant today, is the idea that propaganda also works within a country to kind of promote solidarity and support for the war effort. So I personally used to be really cynical about the idea that we'd have propaganda in our own, country. But in the last 5-10 years, I think I've come around. Does anybody have any feeling about that?
I think we're the best at it.
You think we're the best at it on ourselves?
I mean, every country wants to have Hollywood because it projects your culture and everything out there.
Okay.
That's propaganda.
I mean, I would say yes on certain things. If we're talking about rom-coms out of...
No, I mean...
Right, you're talking about different stuff.
Even war movies, like anything.
Yes.
War movies, our way of life,
Yes.
family get-togethers. It's all propaganda. It's our way of life. Our culture being pushed on someone else.
Yeah.
Top Gun or any of those
Yeah.
jingoistic.
So I buy it a lot more in terms of anything militaristic, anything with a political slant. Julian, you had a hand up?
It's funny that y'all think, the military, I was just thinking about commercials for the Army.
Yes.
As simple as that, because that's Hollywood.
Right.
Just the production, like the way that they produce the advertisements, it's like they throw as much pride as in there as you would see in an advertisement for the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
With fans as well as the players, and everybody's super excited. And
right.
It's the same thing in these Army videos, and you see people shooting, but they don't show who we're shooting at. So it's
right.
like a bunch of aimless bullets being thrown in the air and stuff.
It's always like a high-tech career in the Army, right? You'll be the sonar operator or something, and afterwards or whatever. Yeah.
It's all the same thing.
Okay, so cool. We'll get to Kira in a second. Just also, the connection between sports and militarism is very interesting as well. From Appreciation Day at the football games or something, where the Marines come out, or and everyone applauds for them or stuff like that.
With the
patriotism, right. Fleet Week here. I mean, there's a whole aspect of that. In addition to, absolutely. So, I mean, to me, this makes more sense to talk about propaganda when we are in that military area and stuff like that. But there's also the kind of Fox News, anti-immigration. America first, America for Americans, and that's
nationalists.
So
Exactly.
Kira had her hand up, and then we'll get.
I heard that for the Captain Marvel film, that the trailers are all like Army Strong, like the ones that like want you to go to the army. Like it's not trailers for army movies, but it's like those Army Strong whatever ones where it's like you should join the army today, like in front of the Captain Marvel film. That's in a movie theater with a bunch of children and teenagers.
Okay, I see. Okay, so they got kind of recruiting promotion videos in front of those things.
I think in Captain Marvel, like the girl is like in the army. I think something like that. I don't know what's going on with it, but the Captain Marvel girl herself, I'm pretty sure she was like some sort of like sergeant or something.
Oh, okay,
So
interesting.
all the ads instead of playing
Right.
movie trailers.
Certainly Wonder Woman, she's right there alongside the Allies fighting the Nazis and all the rest of it. So there's plenty of that. And you know, if you put yourself in the shoes of the theater owner or the movie distributor, it is hard to kind of like say, whoa, you know, it's like to the government, it's like, no, we don't want to put your recruiting videos on. Again, you know, we want to respect the sacrifice, you know, and you know, the necessity, the good use of military force. At the same time, it's like, you know, there's all kinds of controversy about it. Chris?
The movie, I don't know if I'm sure everyone's seen it or maybe not, but it's Black Hawk Down.
Yeah, that's
So the book is very thorough and talks about both sides. It was originally written as like a sequence of news articles, and it was collected in.
oh wow.
And so, but it tells the sides of like the soldiers, American soldiers, but it also tells the side of the Somalis, and like how like American soldiers were kind of like harassing. They'd fly the helicopters really low and like blow the women's skirts up and like just kind of like not good things on either side. And so it was like very objective, but. To make the movie, they needed the U.S. military's help, and so they insisted that they only show the one side, like from the
Interesting.
American soldiers' point of view.
So it took that book that had two sides and turned it into
Totally.
like a single point of view of the Americans.
Right, right.
Most movies that ask for the help from the military actually they're being persuaded. They're like, no, you
Right.
can't. Army has the last say on what goes and what doesn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Transformers.
I actually wanted to bring in on Thursday like some stuff I'm listening to about cops, which is the same thing. You know, in order to ride along with whatever police department cops does and film the busts, they have to agree to the police department vets the footage and won't allow something that they don't want up there. So all these producers get, just as you say, they get all kinds of resources and the ability to shoot. Like Pearl Harbor, you know, they got to go on aircraft carriers and stuff like that. You know, move a few destroyers into the background, please. You know, and all that's for free. But they, you know, on the same time, you know, then the military or the cops get their say.
Yeah, what I wanted to say earlier, like, I mean, some people when you say propaganda, they think like posters like that.
Yeah.
But when I said that we're the best at it and it's everywhere, I mean, I'm thinking of like, it just slipped me.
A broader public influence, though, basically. Like you're
Yeah.
talking about exporting the culture, exporting consumerism, exporting democracy, exporting, you know, as well as we're the good guys in any.
Like in the city,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
in the
I
city.
mean, it's like it's all over. I see it all over. I'll think about it and go back to you.
Sure,
I just
sure.
lost it because I was waiting.
Okay, yeah, okay. It's an interesting topic. Did you guys want to share more? Or?
It's because on the BART trains they have those huge ads that are like, you could be a cop today. Like trying to get more people to be policemen.
Like it's more,
weird.
yeah, it's more universal than just like
Yeah.
military.
Yeah.
Even as you said, where it's in Hollywood, like it's literally in advertising.
This is what I'm trying to say. It's not just military, because like one thing I was just this was going to say, Huawei. There's no proof that they're hacking or doing any of that. But just because our government says it, our media picks it up. It's a global network. Like it's not everyone thinks Huawei is the devil, you know.
Yeah.
So that's why I mean, like we do propaganda better than anyone else, and it doesn't have to be just war. It's whatever we want, our way of life.
I
Basically.
mean,
Right.
it's definitely in like the music industry.
Music,
if you watch
exactly.
music videos, you
Exactly.
see
Music is
what
one of them.
brands are being marketed to people. It's like
Yep.
this is what looks cool, and that's not just for like hip hop. It's for pop music,
For everything.
specifically. It's for rock, for every genre out there. Especially with like the most famous people, because they're gonna try to market, even if it's not closed. They're gonna market like the Beats Pill. The Beats Pill is just gonna be sitting there. Somebody's gonna
Right.
press it, and then all of a
Right.
sudden, oh, the music's coming out the Beats Pill.
Because
It's
they're
like-
more about brand than they are about artistic merit, I think.
And they want you to just and the propaganda is that you will get great music if you buy this thing.
Yeah, and the Beats headphones suck.
They just turn the bass up.
Shitty quality.
We all
Yeah,
agree.
it's so bad.
$300 for a woofer.
For a woofer. And bass is not the answer there.
All right. Well, we got to move on so we can get to media violence. No, we were talking pure propaganda. It's great. It's just there's so much in each of these that is of interest. All right, so coming back to putting ourselves in the shoes of early media, social scientists trying to research media, trying to find a direct impact type of evidence, So the magic bullet, obviously they didn't set out to call it that, but people laughing at them afterwards said, yeah, either the magic bullet or the hypodermic needle, the idea the message gets injected and you have no choice, there's no variation, this works on everybody. And of course that turned out to be very inaccurate as a kind of a theory. Yes, Rick?
From back then in the 1920s, right? You think more people were like, not gullible, but more trusting of the government or whatever they said, and
Yeah, I think so.
that might be why they think it's a one-shot, hypodermic needle kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the other thing is in 1920, it's 5 years after, when they went close. It's after the First World War, and it's just like millions of people died, and you got to have some kind of explanation as to why people went through with it,
Depression.
Yeah, and so it was a pressing question. Well, with the failure of being able to find, kind of a direct causal influence between a media message and some kind of reaction, then some different models came out that, as science works, and these are social scientists, you come up with an idea of how something works, you create a hypothesis, and then you do like an experiment or observation to try to prove it, right? And so with the idea that, let's say an experiment with the hypodermic needle idea would be, sit someone in front of the TV, show them an ad, and then, ask them afterwards, do you want to go buy Doritos, or do you want to do this? And this is,
Or chest
there you go,
cigarettes.
right? So, and your theory was the message goes in their brain and they want, right? So that didn't work out. So a new theory comes up, which are called limited effects, right? So what they were hoping to see was a strong effect. See the message, do the behavior. They couldn't find that, so then limited effects and a variety of different approaches were taken up. This first one in research on political influence looked at, so if the strong effect was that you would, for instance, have a government message and it would be sent to a receiver and ding, you would get the result that you want. They had a lot more success in looking at what they called a two-step flow. So the message would go to a receiver, but a very special receiver that was called a opinion leader. And this would be, for example, the president would put out a speech or something like that, and they couldn't necessarily find a strong effect with everybody who listened to it. But if it was run from an opinion leader to other receivers, then they found a significantly better result. So they called this a two-step flow. This would be step one, from the source to the opinion leader, and this would be step two, from the opinion leader out to the rest of the audience. So they found that by putting a respected, trusted community leader at that point in the position as, in this middle point in the two-step flow, you got a lot more success at convincing everybody that the message was right, So this two-step flow is a much more respected model in terms of media persuasion. Can you think now of any way that advertising might take advantage of this notion that opinion leaders are much more effective? Rick?
Oprah.
Oprah, okay, yeah, she's definitely, okay.
What companies go to her, try to raise
Well, she can make a book,
Yeah,
right?
she is.
She can make it a
Selling
bestseller.
chickpea pizzas, and
Everything.
You know.
That's when she got her cable channel. She had to go from high culture to just anything.
Right.
CJ?
It's like when companies go to influencers.
Woo, yeah, that's the one I was fishing for, yeah. So tell us more about that. Who's your favorite influencer? Or not?
I don't really have. Yeah.
Oh, no, but tell me more about influencers.
No, it's like
That's no joke.
I don't know. Like
That's
Kanye West.
genius what they're doing.
at some point in
Dude,
social
they're
media,
all millionaires.
like you just started noticing like people like placing ads and videos or
Yeah,
like
it's like for like
people, like, in
CBD
tweets.
water, some shit like
Yeah,
that.
but it's always like people with like 200 to like 700,000 followers.
Yeah, yeah.
They want people to buy it. Like in LA, there's this thing where all the influencers were like promoting this thing called like Dirty Lemon or something like that, which is just like lemonade with like CBD in it. Everyone was promoting that, and I was like, this is disgusting. And then like they were promoting like vitamin pills. Like it's just so weird what they choose. Like lately, it's been like just food and like health shit for some reason.
I have a couple of questions then. Do you guys think that working through influencers is going to be more persuasive than simply putting an ad on TV or
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
explain?
it goes to like a direct audience
Those solid kids.
or
And-
a direct like.
Okay,
Someone verifying.
okay, and Rick and then Chris, you guys have a lot to say.
Yeah, I mean that's why Facebook is so effective, right? With their advertising, is because people are more willing to buy something if their friend likes a product or something like that, and they use the algorithm to then project that to all your friends. And,
Right.
well,
right.
Rick liked this. This is what you would like. And
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
That's an influence, I
And
guess.
to expand on that, it's it's ultimately cheaper because okay, you can either go the Instagram route or Twitter route and get influencers like celebrities, and you pay them a buttload of money, of course. And some of them aren't even famous, and you're going to pay someone money to be an social media influencer. And while that's expensive, the audience reach is so massive, like it's worth it. And then with Facebook, just it can be free. Liking something is influencing someone else. So it can be free or in the end more cost effective than putting together and paying for an ad and hoping it sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, back in the old days, you used to distinguish between advertising, where you paid for the message, and public relations, where they manipulated people into communicating the message for you. And social media is an interesting, just kind of, there's another, convergence there where it's like, is somebody a paid influencer who's, tweeting about some product? Is that an ad or is that PR? But the cost is so low, as Chris is saying, that as people pick up and retweet whatever their favorite influencer said, they're exponentially magnifying the reach for free, right? So this is the complex but very effective way things are going. And I would just say how interesting that a model from the 1950s still tells us something quite relevant about what's happening in a new social platform now. Rick, final word on this one.
I was gonna say the influencers, right? They also have to be like honest. I forget, you just said
Authentic, yeah.
authentic, right? Like they can't just like put an ad out there and not say it's an ad, because then people distrust them in the future and not do that. But if you say, this is an ad or whatever, like that's more likely to be effective.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think Oprah could lie and she'll get away with it, but it's nothing like Kendall Jenner,
Yeah, again, I
doesn't say,
agree.
like this is an ad.
Celebrity seems to get you by a certain amount of insincerity. I agree. I was just thinking that as you were saying it, but you're kind of, up and coming influencer who doesn't really have celebrity yet or only within a small network has to be authentic.
Right.
And the whole idea of, appraisals of authenticity is a very interesting, thing to look into as well. And we couldn't in this class, and who knows, nothing is definitive, but how do audiences assess whether someone's being authentic or not? What line can you cross and not? It used to be to remain an artist, Bob Dylan or the Beatles couldn't sell their song to an ad, campaign, and now nobody thinks twice about it. That doesn't impact your authenticity, and so on and so forth. People, and in fact, a fan of an influencer might say, well, that product, I know she doesn't really use it, but what the heck, I love her anyway, and most of the time she's being authentic. People have to pay the bills. What the heck? So, there's a whole kind of way that you might even let people off of not being authentic.
It's like people make excuses to do it, like, oh, but I love them so much, so I might as well just do it, because they want you to.
Yeah, and so these researchers talk about what they call a parasocial relationship, which is the relationship developed between the audience who has no real contact with the influencer, or in the case, they talked about it in terms of anchor persons, like Walter Cronkite, the most trusted person in America in the 1960s, because he was on the CBS News every night, was in a way a kind of an early influencer, if you want, in a conservative type of way. But they talked about the idea that audiences feel like close to these people, and so you will give them the benefit of the doubt. This is in a further slide, but I think two-step flow is a question on the exam, and I think it is still useful to talk about what's going on online with influencers and stuff. You guys just did a great job at pulling out all of the contemporary, connections, I think. Another attack, another way to look at limited effects, looked more at differentiating in the audience. So we said one of the flaws of the strong effects was that all people were affected equally. And I mentioned that if you simply look at the way we treat kids and children's audiences today, at least in broadcasting, we obviously now take account of not everyone in the audience is exactly the same. Kids are more easily influenced, and so we should, have special rules for them about how we can advertise to them. Now, as to product placement in Netflix, that's a different story, right? There's all kinds of new gray areas that you can't legislate for everything. But getting back to the 1950s, there was another way of thinking about the audience that became heavily researched and with some utility still today, what they called selective processes. And so this was research that was largely done in the Army because they had thousands and thousands of soldiers that they could basically order to go through with the research. This was the idea that a person, depending on who you were with your prior experiences and beliefs, you would be more or less susceptible to a media message. So again, the strong effect, it didn't matter who you were, you'd see the ad and you'd buy the stuff. But that didn't work out. So with selective processes, it was the idea that, let's say you were a conservative, right? And you were exposed to a liberal message. Let's see what happens then. So first of all, they talked about selective exposure. And this would be that given your druthers as a conservative, you probably would not even want to expose yourself to that liberal message, right? So that's selective exposure. Given your prior set of beliefs, you will avoid messages that do not confirm your beliefs. Selective perception is actually measurable. That if you're a conservative, they didn't measure whether you're a conservative. This is my example. Let me fulfill my example. Okay, if you are, for instance, a conservative and you're exposed to a liberal message, you will remember a lot less of it in post interview than if you're exposed to a conservative message. So play someone an hour of Rachel Maddow or something, and maybe they'll remember the things that really outraged them the most. But play them an hour of Rush Limbaugh, and they could list to you every single thing. So the perception is much deeper when your prior beliefs are being confirmed, basically. And the same thing for retention. If we simply measure how much you retain from what you watched, once again, depending on what your prior understanding and commitments are, you're going to retain less of the stuff that you disagree with. And this was, experimentally tested amongst, as I say, thousands and thousands of Army of soldiers. And of course, they weren't measuring conservatives versus liberals. They were measuring, again, kind of propaganda and the effects of that. Could they make people more effective soldiers by showing them, training films which, basically portrayed the enemy as vicious, as the worst possible thing? Did that raise soldiers' motivations to go in the battlefield and stuff? And they found, that with some soldiers who were absolutely against this, no amount of propaganda exposure would do this. But with other soldiers, then they were. And so by testing, they figured this out. So given what we now know about selective processes, thinking about the media environment as we see it today, does the idea that someone of a different persuasion would actually avoid exposure to messages they don't agree with, does that resonate with you? Can you think of any contemporary examples where that's operative?
What?
Julian? Yeah.
It was like the big issue with Facebook, wasn't it?
How so?
In the sense that like, because the network that you expose yourself to on Facebook is so small, you really only have to see the things you want to see. Versus, yeah, that echo chamber syndrome was really big, like leading into the 2016 election or so. I remember hearing, I stopped using Facebook like after I left high school because I didn't want to keep seeing the same things over and over again.
Interesting.
That's why I like Twitter more than any of the other social media platforms, specifically because you, like, regardless of if you're private or not, you're gonna see some shit that like is just kind of so out of left field from what you even know.
Yeah.
Just because even if you just go to like the big trending topics, like anybody can comment on anything. It doesn't really does not matter. And even if you're private, like I think people can still see your tweets even if they can't get to your account. And so you could be saying some wild thing, you could be saying whatever. And like or you could see something that just is completely contrast to anything you believe. Mm-hmm. And so it's like it's more of a message board for sort of like Reddit in that sense.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a great example of that sheer what? Like the whole impression you stepped into a parallel universe. That is, I think, something that really relates to this. That's how it feels when you are. Your mindset is so totally different than the mindset that produced the message. It's like, what? You think that, man? And then you might just like, I can't deal with that, man. It's too screwed up. I'm not even going to go there. Kira, that rephrases the question a bit.
Like the retweets, I guess, like of people that you would follow.
That's an interesting idea. So the retweet keeps reaffirming your
it's like,
belief
I
system.
keep seeing the same tweet that has such a weird view, and like some people on Twitter kind of like create a topic to talk about, so then everyone on your TL is like quote retweeting it with their opinion, and then you're just kind of seeing what everyone else thinks about this one thing that someone wanted to spark a debate about.
Yeah.
And it's just like really, really weird.
Right.
Because you kind of see the true colors of some of the people that you follow, because they're like, oh, so you think like this? Like, that's really weird. Like,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Because of course everyone is involved in multiple bubbles, right? So if you are following somebody who's like, quite in line with what you think about some things, then maybe it's a surprise when you find out that they're in a different bubble about something else, like, I don't know. But yeah, it's a great point. I was thinking also, in terms of cable news networks and stuff, it is so partisan. And the Fox News kind of bubble is so counter to what I kind of see it as that it's, again, I turn it on and I can't believe they're talking about the things they're talking about or that they have the point of view that they have. And, there was a certain amount of liberal media theory has always been like, well, we need the news in order for everybody to have access to information so that then conservatives and liberals, they're all talking based on the same information. So at least we're having a conversation about what's the right thing to do based on reality or based on something that we're all treating like reality. But when you get deeply into your silos and you get in there and you realize, man, they're not even, what? Then you realize that that liberal idea that we should all have a collective reality that we can discuss, I find it kind of falls apart, and people just bring their selectivity to it.
It's not realistic to expect everyone to be on the same boat like that. I feel like it's just everyone's gonna have their own little opinions because everyone, I don't know, has their own little like complexities in a way. So of course, like not everyone can fit on the same thing just because like of the umbrella of like liberal or like the umbrella of socialist or whatever. Like even though that is supposed to encapsulate one thing, not everyone is going to be on the same page.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, just taking. I think the idea of the liberal media theory was not that we would all agree, but that we would all at least be talking about the same thing if we disagreed, you know?
Yeah.
Versus, like, if there's a huge debate about immigration, but if you look at some channels, you know, it's like, well, country is being overwhelmed, you know, there's like, and the army is being mobilized to the border, and yet, you know, you look at the other media, there's no crisis, there's nothing going on, and then it's like, wow, we can't even agree on what's happening. Hey, Mike, come on in.
Build the wall.
Oh. All right. So, again, to recap on the idea of selective process, the advance in terms of thinking through media effects was to consider the audience not as a single type of receiver, but as a differentiated audience with everybody with their coming to it with their own prior beliefs, which changes the way that they're going to interpret and receive the message. So the media could be quite effective if you are primed and ready to receive the message. It is ineffective if you are kind of against that type of messaging, and that's why they call it a limited effect rather than a strong effect, because it only works sometimes with some people. And then they got into looking at what they would call moderate effects, which basically means that now we start getting into, you know, a difficulty proving anything with any kind of how could I put it? That we have almost anecdotal evidence at this point about certain important media effects, the kind of things that people would prior to this type of research have simply left. They started looking into especially the issue of violence on TV. Here's an example. Sorry, I just completely lost my ability to explain some of this stuff to you. But Bandura's modeling theory is an interesting attempt to think about violence and media exposure. So Bandura, again, remember in this type of research, you come up with a theory, and then you do an experiment, right? And you look for some kind of proof. And then usually you double back around, adjust your theory, and keep going. So, you know, they had a strong effects theory. They looked for some evidence, and then they went to a limited effects. Then they get into moderate effects. So in this case, Bandura was thinking, okay, media violence. My hypothesis is that watching something violent is going to produce violent behavior in the audience, right? So let me try this out. And what Bandura did with kids, in his case, was he would have two rooms, like a big room with one of those Bobo punching bag dolls in it, you know, those kids' room, kids punching, you know, you hit it, and it falls over, and then it comes back up, right? So that's what they called the Bobo doll at the time he was doing it. So, you know, and it was widely viewed as this is a good toy for kids to get their aggression out. They're going to punch out this thing, you know. And so that would be off in a big room, and then they'd sit in a little room with their mom or whatever, and they would watch videos of another kid beating up the doll, basically. And they would, you know, watch that for about 10 minutes or something, and then they'd put the kid in the room and say, Mom is just going to go talk to somebody, and she'll be in a couple of minutes. And then you guys can go home, and you can take your prize and everything. And then so they just put the kid in the room, and then they would like watch and see, does the kid go and beat up the Bobo doll? And, you know, depending on whether they showed videos of a kid beating up the doll or other videos, there was a much higher response rate where the kids who saw the Bobo beating videos went and beat up Bobo just for fun while waiting for Mom to come back, you know. So they called this modeling theory because the theory was that television models behavior for kids to follow. Can you guys think of other modeling behavior that we're, you know, talking about? Depends on the age group. Yeah, kids, especially kids, are particularly susceptible. So we could talk kids, or we could talk, the whole population. Do we tend to think of media as providing models and stuff? What do we think about that?
At least like after reading this prompt, like with the Parkland shooting, I feel like a lot of that was due to media because that kid like made a really weird video that was like, yeah, I want to be the next school shooter. Like I see all these things on TV and I'm gonna do it too. And it's just like, okay, because we like focus so much on these shooters, a lot of copycats come on after that. And then now these kids that were watching these school shooters, and because like we go into so much detail and funneling in our vision on the shooters versus the victims and what we're gonna do about it, these kids are just like, yeah, I should do that too. I could do it too. Like it'll be so cool. I could be on TV and they're gonna talk about me,
Yep.
Something
Yep.
like that.
Good point. There's certainly a lot of fear out there that copycat is modeling works in that way. Chris?
And, I mean, I agree that the media certainly bears responsibility for what they're putting out there, but I really think it comes down to good parenting, parents that are able to distinguish and teach their kids to be able to distinguish between what's reality and what's fantasy. So like video games that are violent are not going to influence a kid to go shoot somebody without, if that kid has good parents who are telling them what's right and wrong. And I think that, like proper gun legislation and access to mental health facilities are going to be much more effective than putting a restriction on news media for reporting on something.
Or even games.
Or games, or movies, whatever, I think.
Yeah. So one sec. We want to go to Mike. I also want to just respond to Chris and just say we should also clarify that there is, the fear that something is influential, and then there's also the evidence that something is influential.
Right.
And I was just thinking that through, what Chris was saying is kind of like, anyone who can distinguish between reality and fantasy runs, less of a chance of just simply becoming a copycat, right? And we'll get to you in just one sec, Mike. Just let me finish my thought here or something. But there certainly is a lot of legislation, for instance, that is created based on the fear of something without necessarily the evidence of it, right? These guys, these social or these media scientists are really looking for evidence versus a lot of times society is simply functioning on fear. So I just wanted to get that out there.
And the parents left the room in the study. So
right. Oh, I got it. Okay, that's an interesting point. I mean, and the other thing I just wanted to say is that, if you look at like the Parkland shooting, right, you're dealing with probably multiple causes. Sure, it could be a copycat, sure. But, if I'm thinking about the New Zealand guy who obviously, prepared a great deal based on, his audience on Reddit or wherever, or what was it, 8chan or something like that, right? So you can feel there somebody who's performing for an audience, and that's not exactly copycat in the sense that copycat is, oh, I'm going to do that because I just saw it done. It's more complex, right? But it's creating a kind of a little online society in which that type of behavior is possibly celebrated. And then you've got a mentally unstable individual who, starts to perform for that little universe, if you want, or that little society. So that is becoming so complex that it's hard to actually research it. But I think, a lot of that is going on. And this doesn't mean that anybody picking out one of those factors and saying that it's important. I think they're right. It's just when we're talking about a complex situation in real life, there's probably a lot of factors going on, and this ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy is an important one too. Yeah. So Mike, finally, yeah.
I agree with her about Planet, and then I was thinking about what happened in San Diego. What I find interesting is because I'm 19 years old. That's what wasn't enough information as why he did it in the beginning, right? But he tried to run away. Compared to New Zealand, another incident over the world. seems like the other so as a murderer or criminal, they have a plan to hurt a lot of people for whatever purpose they want to achieve. Whereas I can do it, or religion, or they're persuaded by something, or hate, or I lost my job. Whatever that is, they are willing to die or fight with the police to the end. Not they were 19 years old from San Diego. So I went away. I was laughing a little bit. I shouldn't be. I said, hey, there's nowhere to run. It's a small town. Everybody know everybody. Where can you hide? There's no 7-Eleven within the 10 miles. I mean, so different environment. And I come from Asian background. My father's a police officer. Even at 17 years old, I was taught, do not get in trouble. Okay? Otherwise, you get disciplined. 16, 15. Here, 11 and 12, you cannot touch them, okay? Well,
Oh, I see. You don't see the same amount of discipline as keeping kids in line.
no, it's not just physical or law, it's in the mind. You're taught to behave and not to get in trouble. Yeah, we have so much temptation. Video game. I saw a 4-year-old young girl sitting in the park of Munich with a mom, both watching their whatever they watch on the cell phone. I said, damn, 4 years old, you let kid babysit your kid with a phone, with a cell phone, whatever they're watching.
Yeah.
And what about subsequency? What about parenting?
Yeah.
What about your job?
Well, you're talking about a bunch of things there that I think are interconnected. Yeah. So, I mean, certainly there's been a kind of I don't know. I mean, I wasn't even alive at the time that you're talking about, but my impression anyway is that just.
It was the late 70s.
Okay, so I was alive, but I was let's say so much a part of it that I had no perspective on it. Let's put it that way. Like simply the way that social rules kind of slackened. Let's put it that way, because I think that's part of what you're talking about. Is like, that maybe because society becomes less restrictive in its way, then there's more leeway for violent acts. Let's
Just one last statement. But for a teenager, 11, 12, 13 years old, thinking bringing a gun to high school is cool, I don't think it will happen in Japan, Korea, China, or those countries, top countries in Asia. Just no such thinking. They're bringing a gun about to school is cool idea, but they do it.
Super high suicide
You do it, I can do it, and it's okay. It's video, movie, everything. I can do it.
Yeah, there must be cultural differences for sure. Does anyone? I'm struggling to talk to Mike about this stuff. Chris, did you have?
Throw it to the table.
That's good.
Well, I was going to go back to the media and its effects on kids, but like as a side note, I mean, there are different issues though. I mean, like in Japan and Korea, like they have extremely high suicide rates among young people, specifically like school-age kids, because of like it's just a total
Pressures, competitive
Yeah.
pressures, maybe.
They have their own issues that they need to work out. You know, we certainly have ours with like violence and everything. But back to this, I think like we keep going through this, and like in the 80s there was the whole PMRC thing with like Tipper Gore and
Oh, okay.
and
Parental lyrics.
the parental lyrics. So like that
whatever it was.
advisory sticker was the compromise that they reached, but they were trying to like ban. The whole idea was that if like Twisted Sister, like Frank Zappa, if they wanted to have an album cover and lyrics that were not appropriate for kids, and they wouldn't be able to sell it in stores. And you can watch it on YouTube, and it's like super fascinating to watch. They even brought out.
Is it a documentary about it, or?
No, you can watch the whole hearing, and
Oh, the hearings! Wow.
Al Gore and the other like senators that were on the committee even brought out John Denver to try and like argue their side of the case about like decency, and he totally blasted them. He was like, "This is wrong with what you're doing."
Whoops.
And so he was in line with like these heavy metal guys,
Right.
Frank Zappa, and they were like the looks on their faces were just like,
I did see an interview where Zappa was talking to some kind of talking head about this.
yeah. It's
interesting.
really fascinating, but it's the exact same thing. It's like they were trying to pin lewd lyrics or lyrics in heavy metal music about violence or rap music about violence as like the cause of bad behavior in kids, and it's like all these guys were like, well, what about parents? Like,
Yeah.
you're infringing on our right to make money as artists. Where's the parenting come in?
Right, right.
Where's the legislation?
These are familiar lines of debate, right?
Yeah,
when it
it's the
comes
same
when it
thing.
comes to video games, they did it with comics. They did
Yeah,
all
it's
kinds
always.
of. Kira?
I feel like most of the parents of these shooters are good parents. They don't expect their kids to do it. It's these kids and their children who are just like weird. Like, cause like a lot of these, like I would look at the statements of the parents or like this one TED Talk that was like, I'm the mother of a Columbine
Yeah,
shooter.
she
Like,
did a book. She did a whole.
like, they were good parents. Like they were trying their best. Like they just did. Like they did not expect their children to do that. Like even in the Parkland thing, like they're like the parents were like, yeah, we gave him like the most love, the most support. Like we don't understand why he would do something like this. It's like, and then like even with the Santa Barbara shooting, that weird Elliot Rogers kid, his parents were chill. But like he just was not chill at all.
Yeah, but
He was,
how
like,
aware are
incel.
they of,
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I
of
mean,
what
like-
the kids
Well,
up
like
to?
it's, I mean, how aware are any parents of what their kids are up to?
Yeah.
I mean, like most parents are not aware because kids aren't like being realistic right now. Teens are not like shelling out their lives to their parents.
That's
ever.
true, but
Yeah.
that's still like it's incumbent upon the parent to like have good dialogue with your kid and like
I mean,
and it comes
it's-
down
it's
to
a two-way
parenting and
street.
raising your kids to be able to it is a two-way street and that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like parents do need to have some responsibility to like be able to relate to your kid, teach them from a very early age like what's right and what's wrong. And you look at like the Sandy Hook kid who's a lunatic. His
He was
mother
just
was also a
autistic.
lunatic. She was a bad person.
He was autistic. Like
But they had tried like hell to
kept
get him
guns.
some kind of help, right? But
And
it,
she kept guns. She was also crazy. She had tons of access to guns.
Professor,
Okay.
where is the parents?
I don't know. This is a course about media, so luckily I don't. The only way I have to deal with parents is as a kind of a fantasy image in the midst of these theories, basically.
Well,
Yeah.
the parents are the ones trying to make these laws, right?
But that's
In a way, you know, but again, the laws may be based on fear rather than evidence, which is,
Right.
I mean, Al and Tipper, they call that a moral panic, and it's a political move, right? But it's like, let's knock Hollywood for being too permissive. Let's create the comic book code. And or we skipped entirely film history last, but there was the Hays Code, which was
Yep.
like you can't show anything like a full face kiss or something on ridiculous. Julian,
What about like kids?
hope this isn't about parents.
No, I was literally gonna say the opposite. 'Cause,
Awesome.
like, these parents aren't in school with the kids. The kids are in school with other kids, so I don't think it has anything to do with like what your parents say or don't say, because it has everything to do with not only like how you're interacting with your peers in the classroom, but also how you're interacting with them online. Because I know when I was a teenager, I was not trying to let my parents know what was happening with me online.
There was
You're
that.
for surely trying to like do everything you can to like make sure they don't see your internet presence.
Right.
But that being said, like you could be in Chrome Incognito searching all types of fucked up shit, and like sorry for my language, but it literally like comes back to that, because it's like there's all sorts of crazy stuff that's on the internet. So it's not even just the violent video games at this point. It's like, what are you watching on YouTube?
right.
peers as well. Like
Because you could get sent something from
I
your peer
agree
real
with
quick,
that,
and then you're
yeah.
just like, oh, well, I'm gonna just watch it.
Right.
Or
Okay, all
or
right.
in the case of the kids that are actually shooting people up, it's like, oh, how are they being isolated and outcasted to the point where it's like they don't even have somebody else to talk to? It's like, oh, I mean, in Columbine it was like the two kids
Yeah.
together. But now with the internet, it's like everybody is all. It's like as everybody is more interconnected, everybody is being pulled apart, and like we're not communicating at all.
Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and there are sort of media philosophers who are talking in precisely that way. The people studying this kind of violence, all right? And Rick, we want to get back to you in a sec, but I just need to move this along like one step a little further into the actual research done. And so what I could tell you all, which is fitting with what you're saying, is, and what you're saying, what I'm decoding is that this is very complex. It delves into like parenting styles and stuff like that, which are far outside the expertise of, these types of media researchers. I mean, you'd have to go to a class, in psychology and stuff, and try to connect things that have never really been connected. But what they have found through, developing out of this type of, simpler research where you don't try to account for, was it parenting, was it copycatting or stuff like that. You try to whittle it down to a few influences and then see what you can get out of it. So, I mean, what they have done through a variety of social research methods, they found that the kids who are, engaged in the kind of communication that Julian's talking about, like antisocial behavior, bullying online, or, cultivating, to the extent that they can follow up what kinds of media are being consumed. There is a connection between kids who like to watch a lot of violent content and kids who test as very aggressive in their thoughts towards other people. So by that I mean they're not like analyzing the survivors or the surviving perpetrators of mass murder. They're basically analyzing respondents, thousands of kids responding basically what's your reaction to stuff. Sometimes what they would do, for instance, is a long kind of questionnaire administered by somebody, then show or allow them to play violent video games, and then more questionnaires with kinds of scenarios. A kid flips you off in the middle of the playground. What are you going to do? And this happens. What are you going to do? And then just testing. It's basically, how were you going to respond before? How do you respond afterwards? So through all of that, basically what comes out of it is that there's a strong link between antisocial behavior and viewing video violence, but they don't know if it's causal. It's simply the kids who do engage in antisocial behavior tend to like that kind of media a lot more. But they can't prove whether one causes the other. Do you see what I mean? So it's early on they would have loved to have had, okay, we show you this film and you go out and you bully people or you do these things. But they can't do that. All they can say is that, boy, of the kids who do test this way, they also really like this type of media. That's the best they've been able to do. So no causal relationship, but a co-relationship. In other words, these things go together, but they don't necessarily cause each other. And that's where it is at, basically.
Comorbidity.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So a dependent relationship without being a causal relationship. Cause would mean show the video, they have that behavior.
Yeah.
Never being able to prove that, right? And so, bring it back to Columbine, the parents probably were not aware of the degree of media consumption that was going on, and that may not have been what was pushing anything to happen, but it was certainly, a kind of predisposition that was there. On the other hand, as a parent, if my kid was consuming all of this stuff, I would start to worry, and then it would be well, what can I do? What can I, what therapist can I bring the kid to? Can I change schools 10 times to try to get them in an environment where they're not running into all this? It's just then the trials begin. But that's about trials, the difficulties, not the police trial. I don't know. Mike, did you want to say more on this?
I was going to say, should I say a bad joke, how this compared to court, first degree of murder, you're only guilty, proven without any reasonable doubt. Of course, there's relationship, interlock that someone can be triggered to set a point. Now we add to parents divorce, parents lost the job,
Yes.
marijuana.
Yeah, okay. Now we're back into too many variables, if you want. I call it that. So, but the ambition of these folks is to find evidence to prove kind of a theory of a media effect. And so what I'd say is ultimately it's a bit of a failure. If we come to it at 10 past 10 thinking, yeah, I mean, it just makes sense, right? You watch a lot of really violent stuff and there's much more violent stuff on TV, then you are going to, act it out, or some kids are going to act it out, or some people are going to act it out. But when they try to, carefully construct, research, they can't prove it. All they can do is say, Well, the people who do act it out, they do tend to like that type of media.
Yeah. Well, crazy people are just gonna be crazy. I mean,
And they're predisposed
yeah,
to doing
yeah.
like,
I mean, I like violent movies. Tarantino is one of my favorite directors.
Yeah.
Blood, bullets, whatever. I know it's escapism.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to like be entertained. I get upset. I'm not gonna go and like bring out a sword and start slashing people.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I know that's a movie and that's like
Right.
it's not real. So
and you have empathy.
I feel like
It's like-
people
Yes,
are just gonna
empathy
be.
is a big point. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
I don't
not
think making a law is gonna change the people's mindset. It's just
How do you mean making a law like?
making these laws to like protect the kids, whatever. What I'm thinking of,
got it, okay.
What I'm thinking of is the UK just passed a law about pornography on the internet, right? And so now if you want to go to a porn site, you have to put in your credit card and like all this stuff so they can track you.
Okay.
But all the kids have to do now is
That's UK.
download a VPN and they
Yeah,
can
okay.
sign in from
Yeah.
another country
Yeah.
and
Where there's a will, there's a way.
yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's people messed up people are just gonna be messed up people. You just have to I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
Hope for the best.
in a sense, when you start differentiating the audience and trying to take account of their cognition, which is back to the 1950s, that's what they're doing. Basically, they're trying to say, well, not everybody is alike. And what you're saying is, there are people who are going to commit the most flagrant kind of acts of violence, or they got a lot of other problems apart
Yeah.
from what media exposure.
And I think protect the kids is always what do you call it? I don't know. It's my brain is dead
It's
today.
like a false
Well,
flag.
False
but
flag, yeah. It's something that they use.
I really felt that until I had kids, and then I realized that my 10-year-old still can't watch like a 13-year-old movie without having nightmares or something. And so if it's again, that's not a proof of anything, but it just makes me far more sympathetic to the idea that there's stuff that some kids are not ready for, basically.
But as a parent, you're able to not allow your kids
Yeah,
to
you
watch that
realize
stuff,
that.
right?
Absolutely, yeah. You got to have some control.
Where me at 9 years
Yeah.
old, I was watching those kung fu movies where they're breaking people's necks and stuff. Like,
Yeah, but we know it's fantasy.
Yeah.
And we're not going and
One
acting
shooting
out.
I've only been on
Like,
one
I
shooting
was
spree.
watching
Yeah,
it.
it doesn't.
But again, to come back to sexuality and porn, again, we may not be able to prove any direct impacts, but kids who are far younger are talking about kind of ritualized sexual activity that is it's
that's
like
true.
porn loops and stuff like that. They may just be joking about it, but that maybe some of them are doing it. I don't know, and I'm the kind of person who would say whatever floats your boat. But again, to see like much younger kids involved in much more kind of ritualistic and impersonal sexual acts, and knowing that it is, the byproduct. It's like, we'll get into this next class, basically, in terms of violence, and this is a perfect place to stop. But, there are kinds of cultural effects which are indirect, but precisely the idea that anybody now could get access to, these really kind of over and over again, the exact type of sexual activity on porn and stuff. The fact that that's happening, you may not find any individual case where this is going on, but it just changes the culture. Even if it is moving by 3 or 4 years down, the age that people are aware of this, or even if it is, resulting in, this much more kind of inconsiderate activity. I don't know. Well, we can get into it, but there is proof by George Gerbner at Stanford over many decades, pretty brilliant research, just showing that not individual acts of violence caused by media, but a cultural shift in how people perceive their environment as much more violent and dangerous caused by media. The idea that any single kid watching, people being blown up on TV doesn't lead to that, but the entire culture being exposed to violent act after violent act after violent act on TV, that does have this kind of ambient effect, if you want to call it that. Gerbner doesn't, but so let's pick it up next class with that. But I just from today, I realized that porn also could be thought of in this way. Just this subtle overall changes in how people view, the world. So let's do it, okay?
Go
Anyway, The Go team, absolutely. This was for so few people in the room, you guys had such great things to say.